When you're getting your first VA loan, I see a lot of good intentions gone by the wayside. But here are the 3 main steps you need to take before you use your VA loan for the first time. I'm really excited to make this video so you can really understand what are the main 3 steps that you should take before you get your VA loan. If you're new here and you don't know who I am, my name is Rick Elmendorf. I am a loan officer and been doing loans for over 30 years. In fact, my team and I have been in the top 1% of loan officers in the nation since about 2003. And yes, I'm dating myself. Check out my haircut. You can see I've been in the business a long time. But in all seriousness, I'm really looking forward to showing you some of the things that you can avoid and some of the things to do as well when you're getting your first VA loan. So let's get started. Step number 1 in any home purchase, especially in the VA loan scenario, is to know your numbers. I created a worksheet, a purchase worksheet that basically allows people to run their numbers for VA loans. But if you are a first-time user, you can get into home with no money down. And the reason why it's just so important to know your numbers, you have to do the numbers to figure out, is it a good time to buy? It's been my experience that typically with a new mortgage, you're doing a lot more than just making a payment. And it's not the right thing to do. Obviously, we're in a much higher interest rate environment than we have been in many years. So it is not the best calculation. You're more than likely going to be having a lower rent payment than you would a mortgage payment. So part of knowing your numbers is not just how the cash to close shakes out or what your monthly payment would be, but really is, what is this house going to be from an investment standpoint? What is it going to cost me if I do go to sell? What could I potentially rent this house for? This is something we really want to go into a little bit more in detail, especially with the knowing your numbers piece of this. When you get a mortgage, it's really important to look at things that you don't really see on the surface. Again, not just looking at the payment, but looking at the underlying. How much are I actually contributing towards the house? Obviously, when you own a home, you have other benefits there. You've got every payment you make, part of that payment goes towards principal. So you can't really do a comparison to say, okay, here's rent and here's mortgage payment. That it's not really the same thing, because part of your mortgage payment is going to pay principal. It's really important to figure out. Also, when you go to sell, more than likely in pretty much every area across the country, especially in a year following a presidential election, you're going to have home appreciation. It's been that way literally since the beginning of time, except for 1 year, 1 cycle of the presidential election. But pretty much every time, home prices go up. And what does that mean to you? More equity. If you bought the house for $400,000 and the home appreciates 10% in that 3 years, you just made 40 grand. And all the while, you've been paying yourself principal instead of paying a landlord. So you get my drift. You've got that kind of equity, that built-in savings plan. A lot of VA home buyers, especially first-timers, they're getting into homes with the higher interest rates at a little higher payment than they're comfortable with, maybe a little bit higher than your basic allowance for housing. That's okay though, because we want to look again at this very simple math equation. So where are you buying? What's the historical appreciation for this area? What's it going to cost me to sell? How much equity have I built up by paying down my principal? And then you just do the math. It's very simple equation, and it's not a feeling. This is just math, pure math. Is it better to rent or stay on base than it would be to buy a house and get a mortgage? Another thing that's potentially in your benefit is if interest rates we know are falling. Mortgage rates have been pretty high, and they've been high since, October, really high since about October 2022. And it's been a horrible couple of years. But now we're starting to see signs with a lot of factors, but inflation is under control. Mortgage rates are coming down because mortgage rates follow inflation, and they've got a long way to go. And I see rates getting much better. So if you are seeing a mortgage interest rate decline, then that's another reason why you want to buy, because you want to buy when there's nobody else looking, when there's low demand. Then when you have lower interest rates, you simply refinance and reap the lower payment. I'm doing calculations on this kind of across the board on my purchase spreadsheet where, we're seeing, even a 1% lower interest rate. That's saving hundreds of dollars per month in your mortgage payment, which is obviously something to consider. But back to the analysis of like renting versus owning, we have this tool. It's called a rent versus buy analysis, and I'd be happy to give this to you. It takes me just a couple of minutes to do. It basically calculates the benefits of renting versus buying, and it may be better to rent. I don't know. It depends on the area because it all depends on like forecasted appreciation, historical appreciation, cost to sell, all those things we want to factor into the numbers. But basically this form will be super simple. I find out what your BAH is and I tell you how much home you can buy, keeping that around your mortgage payment with no money down. And then I run an analysis to see what the net gain would be if you'd have bought your house, or if it's bad, if it's a negative net gain, that's not good too. So if you sold in 3 years, that's what I look at, kind of the benchmark, especially if you are considering keeping the home and building wealth with your VA loan. And that takes me to the next step. Step 2, using your VA loan as a way to build wealth. There's a great quote about housing, and it says, the best time to buy a house is always 5 years ago. Homes go up in value. Only a couple times in history have we really seen home values get crushed. The financial crisis is one of them. Even in a lot of areas, the financial crisis of 07 and 08 didn't really kill home prices in many of the areas in the MSAs around the country. So kind of like if you're going to be near a military base and if you're military moving in, you're probably going to be moving to an area that has a lot of jobs. So you're kind of insulated from bad things happening. Now you go outside that. I mean, Arizona got crushed during the financial crisis. Florida got destroyed in certain areas of Florida. Again, though, where's the military presence? Areas like Northern Virginia didn't really get hurt. Some areas did, but like closer to where people were reporting for duty, I'm sorry, it just didn't get hit. I went through it. I know it. So let's talk about how to use your VA loan to build wealth. I'll tell you a little story about a client of mine. He had these thought processes before I was able to coach him about it. The idea was he bought a house, his first house in Pensacola, for no money down. And he bought a house. Well, guess what? He didn't sell the house he bought in Pensacola. He retained it and he rented it out to somebody, more than covering his mortgage payment. And the way the VA works is that you work off of your entitlement. So you have an entitlement increases every year as the conforming loan limit goes up. He used his VA benefits to buy one house, hold on to it, rent it, bought the next house with no money down, bought that, stayed there a year, moved to North Carolina where he got his next assignment. So when he did the PCS to North Carolina, he left the house in Texas and he rented that out for a pretty big profit. Maybe this is a talk we could have on a strategy call, is he bought a 2-unit. So he bought a multi-unit and he lived in one side, rented the other side out, basically offsetting his mortgage payment. And then he ended up renting out both those units as he PCS'd to his next duty station. But the cool thing is, on his third duty station, he still had enough entitlement to put very little money down. And now he has, count them, 3 VA loans, all doing very, very well for him. His cash flow on the first and the second properties, by the way, both have gone up in value, and the dude's doing very well because of the investments he's made. He's used his VA loan to build massive wealth, cash flow, and massive wealth. The last I checked, the very first house he bought, it was like in the $300,000 range, and the home's worth over $400,000 now. So now just do the math of what your rate of return was if you put no money down and then you walk away with almost 100 grand. Not bad. Step 3 is to get your finances in order. It starts with what your credit is and then how much cash do you have. As I mentioned, you don't need a cash down payment to get your first VA loan. You can do no money down, but depending upon the market you're in, you're going to still need money for closing costs. More than likely, depending if it's a competitive environment. Literally walking in the door having spent no money. Like I had a client, no joke, I think their final number was 1 penny. I'm not kidding. Like they got all their closing costs paid, and at the end of the day, $999 and whatever it was back at closing, which was like a whole penny. So that's a pretty good rate of return. And I've done videos on this. You can check my videos about VA loans, about make sure you're working with the right professionals. In VA, it is so important that both your real estate agent and your lender understand VA. You know, from the negotiating standpoint on the VA, but also on the VA side, the VA lender has to talk to the listing side. And by the way, if that's not happening, the realtors are doing something wrong. The financing piece of it, I will tell you, if they can't get a hold of the lender, you're probably not gonna have a very good time negotiating that offer. So they will contact the lender. They always do. They always track me down. And unfortunately, sometimes I find out a little too late. So I like to make a preemptive phone call to that listing agent, introducing myself and telling them the financing is solid. It's a great way to get your offer at the top of the pile. Additionally, there's a very famous quote that says, if you don't ask, you're not going to receive. And this is in regards to seller concessions, seller paying the closing costs. So it is always a good idea to ask the seller, if it makes sense for you financially and you need or should get the closing cost concessions, it's okay to ask for it. I have seen real estate agents swear up and down that sellers will never ever pay closing cost concessions. Well, guess what? Have you asked? There's a little psychological benefit to offering more for a house. I mean, for example, let's just say there's an offer that comes in at $300,000 and they're not asking for closing costs. And then the next offer comes in at $308,000 asking for $8,000 in closing costs. Well, the offer is actually the same. A seller would much rather say that they sold their house for $308,000 than $300,000. Wouldn't a real estate agent like to say, I just sold your neighbor's house for $308,000? I know, the rest of the market's like $300,000. Well, this is a psychological thing. I'm telling you, it works. I do hundreds and hundreds of transactions a year. Those sellers are always more bent on taking a higher offer, even though there's this other stuff in there. Okay, it makes sense. Ask for it. Hey, nothing's gonna mess up as long as it appraises for your list price or for the net number, to overcome all the problems. I'm getting a little bit too detailed here, but as you can see, it's not just a dead set no when you are making an offer to get seller to pay closing costs. I don't understand why my fellow lenders out there, all they do is like, here's your numbers and here's your pre-approval letter. And they let the realtor do all the work in discussing the financing and the offer and everything. There needs to be a planning session, a strategy call with your loan officer to go over financing that can look under the hood. The idea in this planning session is say, okay, financially, this is the best thing to do. So let's just start there. I don't care about your credit. I don't care about your cash. I don't care about anything of this. Okay, where do you want to live? What's the best way to finance it? Boom, there we go. Now the question is, where are you? And how do we get you there? This is the planning piece of it. So those are the three main steps for using your VA house for the first time. If any of this is confusing, and I know this is a lot of information here, head on over to rickelmendorf.com and schedule a 15-minute call with me. This is just an intro call, a what if, kind of check under the hood, answer any questions. You can also leave a comment on this video and I will respond to it. And be sure and check out some of my other videos here on the page. This is Rick and I'll see you on the next video.